What's going on, everybody? This is David with political ideas and thoughts. I might not release this video, but I'm gonna talk about it anyways, because I probably will release this video because it is something important. But I'm gonna try and keep it strictly to the subject at hand. Try not to get too much into my opinions on this particular subject, because there's a lot to go over, and if I do that with my opinions involved, it'll take hours. So I'm going to try and do this quickly, but it'll probably be a long video, so that's just a little warning. So what's this video about? This video is about how things may seem good or simple, or whatever it might be, and how I can explain this to you in a way you may not have realized before. So let's start with the word like harm. You might think with a word like harm that the definition of it would be pretty obvious, right? But you see, the problem is that some people have a totally different definition of harm. Harm, or whatever it might be, to some people is causing violence or whatever to another person, to damage that person monetarily or professionally or whatever. But some people have the definition of harm of words are violence, and so they consider that to be part of harm. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm just saying that these are complicating factors. So for instance, when you say you shouldn't do harm to someone, sounds like a good idea. Sounds noble. But what happens, what could be the problem, what could end up being a problem, is when these different definitions come about. Not doing harm to someone's one thing, but saying something that maybe should be said to somebody. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to say it in a mean way. Be respectful, be polite, but saying something to somebody that maybe should hear it, maybe needs to listen, that could be considered harm. So do no harm to this person. So in that case, it might not be so good. So what does this have to do with politics? Lots of things. I mean, there are so many different things that these different definitions have. These different words have different definitions. And the law has these overcomplicated words and definitions, and so something that sounds good in theory maybe even be good in principle in the law, but when it's practiced, it may not be so good. Another good example of this definitions change thing is harassment. You may think that harassing someone is not a good thing, and I don't disagree, right? But some people's definitions of harassment are totally different than other people's. Some people's definitions would be like to constantly harangue or try and, well, not trying, but try, constantly, sending death threats or rape threats or, any kind of threat, or just, constantly messaging this person, being disrespectful or whatever it might be. But some people's definitions of harassment are a bit different. Some people think harassment is like threats, or coming up to your door when you didn't ask them to, or something. And other people's definitions of harassment include saying things that are mean to a person, but that most people may not consider to be harassment. And so this whole thing kind of whole definition thing causes problems in some ways, because laws, like I said, they sound good if you don't look at the definitions, or if you don't look at the specificities of it. They sound good. Or even if the specificities even sound good, like maybe in practices that the laws doesn't exactly do what it says it's supposed to do or should do or whatever. And so we have this problem of, the details, the devil's in the details is a good way of putting this, I guess. But, by the way, I'm not saying that you have to look at all these different, details, but I'm just saying that, be aware that this could be happening. This could be the possibility. This could be what's, causing these problems. Sorry. And so we have this problem of definitions, things not being clear, and so things sound good in practice. Another good example of this, although this one will be probably even more controversial than the last two that I talked about, is having social media sites, basically censoring and dealing with fake news. But what is fake news? Who decides what is fake? What is real? Social media companies are now the arbiters of truth, because people want to remove fake news or whatever. I'm not saying that I like fake news, or that fake news isn't necessarily a problem. But what is a problem? What could be a problem is that who gets to decide what fake news is? I mean, most people may agree that saying that vaccines cause well, let's not go with that one. But let's say most people would agree that gravity causes something to fall, and if somebody says something to the contrary and puts that in a story or something, that would be fake news. But most things are not like this, and so we have these problems where these companies are now the arbiters of truth. And like I said, I understand why this is the case, because fake news can be a problem, but the problem isn't fake news itself. The problem is the lack of not necessarily contradictory evidence, but the lack of countering that comes about from fake news. So basically what I mean by this is, say you have like a social media company like Twitter or Facebook or whatever. They start monitoring fake news, and then they start removing it. What happens? What is going to happen? Well, one thing that might end up happening, which is what I'm afraid is going to happen, is that people may have seen that fake news before, and then that fake news disappeared a couple minutes later or something, and then nobody gets to see the truth of that fake news because it's gone now. It's banned from that site. And so people will believe this fake news even more than they would ordinarily, because there's no counter to that argument. And so now social media companies are now the arbiters of truth. And like I said, who gets to decide what is fake news and what isn't? What is fake news? What is actually real? Do we even know? Do they even know? Because I don't know. I don't think they know either. Because, Covington, the whole Covington Catholics thing is a good example of people believing something that ended up being false. Basically, the story goes, the story in the news before before it was called out and before people realized what was happening. Basically, it goes like this. Some guy was prevented from moving away from some teenage kid, and this guy was drumming at this kid, trying to get out of the way. He was like moving around trying to move away from this kid, or so the news was claiming. Turns out that the guy was lying, and the guy was actually going up towards the kids themselves. And so we have this problem of over-exaggeration and fake news and misleading video that shows this. And so what would have happened if they had this in place back then, which they may have had it in place? They would have gotten rid of it. They would have said this was fake news. If somebody would have countered this and shown this is fake news. Well, now you just censored real news. You just censored the truth. I'm not saying that it's true or not. I'm just saying that this is a good example of how fake news can take over even the mainstream media sites and companies. It happens. It's just part of life. We're not perfect human beings. We make mistakes. And so this is going to happen. This is just an inevitable part of life. And so we have this problem of who gets to decide now. Do you want them to decide for you what truth is? Because I don't want them to decide, because what is truth? What is falsehood? Because I don't know. I don't think they know either. Not always. And so we have these problems. Another good example, even though this one is probably less controversial, which is probably why it's a better example, but conspiracy theories. YouTube is, I don't know if they're doing it anymore, but they did it for a while. They were censoring conspiracy theory videos. They were deleting them, or warning people about them or something. But who gets to decide what is a conspiracy theory, or what is conspiracy theory? Basically just means just another word for fake news, because the word conspiracy theory has been a way to slander and smear certain things that actually turned out to be true. A good example of this actually was the Gulf of Tonkin incident back in 1964, when basically the thing that started the Vietnam War. Turns out that it was overblown, exaggerated, and whatnot by the military, and the media covered it. And people at the time were saying that something doesn't seem right about this. This looks like it was exaggerated, and they were called conspiracy theorists. Turns out they were right. And so, who gets to decide what a conspiracy theory is? So yet again, we have people deciding. Then we have social media companies deciding what is the arbiter. Who, basically, companies are now the arbiters of truth. So, another one, although this one is a lot more complicated, but it's also a possible one to throw out here. Although this one might be more controversial than any of the other ones, but the idea of hate speech. There's this idea that you have to censor hate speech. Well, what is hate speech, right? We don't actually know what that is. That definition could be changed. And so we have possibility of that system being used. Basically, so now social media companies become the arbiters of morality. I'm not saying that hate speech is good or bad or shouldn't be censored. I'm saying that we're now having corporations who are not controlled by the people, now in control of what we can say, what we believe to be true, and how we can respond to this problem. And I'm not saying that they're going to use this, like, I'm not going to give you a conspiracy theory of saying, oh, they're going to, I don't know, use this to decide everything for us. And because there's a big cabal of the Illuminati who's, controlling everything or something. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the problem here is that everybody is biased. These companies, the people who run these companies, and, me, you, anybody, are biased. And so we're going to have people who are imperfect, are biased, and, machine learning, algorithms who may not understand the greater context of, something that's said or whatever, are now controlling the conversation. I'm not saying that you have to regulate these companies or whatever. I'm just saying that these are just factors that are overlooked most of the time. They're just, people just say, oh, we have to censor these things, we have to not censor these things. I'm not saying that. I'm saying both of those solutions are too simple. And so, like I said, this is not a conspiracy. I'm not saying that they're just going to say you can't say this because of, whatever reason. It's going to be causing more of a, well, there's a couple problems that'll happen. One thing is the biases are going to basically continue on, get stronger maybe even, and there'll be like an echo chamber. Basically what an echo chamber is okay, say you have like something that you read or whatever on Google or Facebook or like Google search or something, and so that thing is going something like that or something similar to that is going to keep coming up. And so what's going to happen is you're going to think, oh wow, this is really popular, this must be true, this must be something that most people agree on or something, when in reality it may not be. It may be something strange, like most people would be against, like, I don't know, we faked the moon landing or something. I'm not saying that nobody believes that or anything. I'm just saying that this is cause for concern. And I'm not saying that we have to stop algorithms from recommending things or anything like that. I'm just saying be wary of anything that seems, I don't know, just not necessarily be wary of anything that seems to be, popular or whatever. But when it comes to these things, you can always ask, like, what are the ramifications of this? What are the definitions of these things? What are the specificities that, they might be seeing or saying or seeing or whatever it might be? And the reason why doing this is important because it leads to more foresight, more understanding of these problems, and of how the mind works, even to some extent. Because if you read between the lines, you can see how a lot of this is caused by minds who have default positions or whatever, believe something is true or whatever it might be, which is a default position in a way. I'm not saying that that default position is wrong. It might be right, but it's still a default position. And so, if it's wrong, it's going to be controlling their worldview. If it's right, it's going to be controlling their worldview. So, this video is going to be very controversial, but I just thought it would be worth trying to explain this problem that happens here. So there's a lot more that I could talk about, but I'm going to leave it there for now. This is Political Ideas and Thoughts, and I'll see you in the next episode.